Sunny Fleming is an industry specialist for the public sector and conservation of the company Esri. Many of you are familiar with Esri. If you use ArcGIS, you know this company. Sunny Fleming is her background is in plant ecology and botany. Sunny is one of us. She's applied location intelligence throughout her career, from monitoring species in the field as a heritage botanist to helping state parks manage recreational assets across their systems. She continues to pursue her passion for the environment by now championing for Esri's large user community of environmental professionals. NAA has enjoyed a partnership with Esri over the last few years, and certainly working with Sunny has been a real treat. So it's our honor to bring her to you today, so you can hear what she has to share with us. With that, I'll turn it over to Sunny.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate it. And yeah, it looks like I have a lot of friends on this call as well that have participated in today's discussions and breakouts. So that was really cool. I was able to actually go to the prairie discussion briefly. I have a particular passion for prairies, and that was really interesting what I was able to see of that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So hopefully that's showing for everybody and they can see it, and I will get started. Yeah, I am really excited to have been invited by Natural Areas Association and Lisa and Moira and the LTERs, as you all were planning this, to close out this awesome virtual conference. It might seem a little odd to think about technology in the context of the theme of this year's virtual conference, but that said, I really see it aligning well. Of course I do. It's what I think about daily, is the intersection of technology and the work that we do as environmental professionals broadly. But what Natural Areas has done today is super cool, I think, bringing together two widely different temporal scales, really thinking about the long-term research that the LTERs are doing and how that can be applied to the day-to-day, right? Those are two very different kinds of temporal scales. And when we think about technology, and especially maps, I'm always thinking about scale, whether it's spatial or temporal. So, the core of the work we conduct is really about collaboration, sharing information. That was the whole spirit of the discussion today. And I really believe that technology is going to be key to our ability to more effectively collaborate moving forward in an era where applied environmental knowledge is more sought after than ever before. So who am I? You heard a little bit about my biography from Lisa. But yeah, I'm Esri's industry lead for environment and conservation. I'm focused on state and local government, but because of the collaborative nature of the work we do, that also impacts me here at Esri. So I get to collaborate with my federal partners, my nonprofit partners, my tribal partners, and at all different scales. So it's really cool because in my former life, as a heritage botanist with Tennessee Division of Natural Areas, and then later with state parks, I was often getting pulled into all sorts of different kinds of work. And again, the collaboration was absolutely necessary. And through those experiences, I always had this really incredible, powerful toolbox, this thing called GIS, or Geographic Information Systems, that I was using. So that's definitely informed a lot of my philosophies and my approaches and how I continue in my role at Esri, which is now really to keep a thumb on the heartbeat of how our community continues to apply these tools, as well as the opportunities that we have on the horizon as it may be influenced by policy or by social demand or other trends that might impact us as environmental professionals. So really, it's all about helping our community think about how we can take the tools further than what we may have before, and why, really setting a direction for that. And so that's going to be the core of what I talk about today. But strangely enough, I know Lisa's always, she always cracks up when I start my presentations, because they always start them in little oddball ways. And I'm not going to stop anytime soon with that. So today, my story is actually going to start at home. We've recently moved to a new state. So I used to live in Tennessee, now I'm in North Carolina. And the home we bought was built in the 1960s. And unfortunately, the whole thing needed a renovation. So that was our original to the house 1960s kitchen that we moved into. And for better or worse, we know everything about this house now, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And one quirky thing that has really caught my eye is that the doorbells on the house have this really bizarre medallion. It's hard to see on the left, that's the actual doorbell, but I stole a picture from Washington Archaeology. They actually have this on one of their websites. So that's the picture on the right. So it turns out I live in something called a gold medallion home. In fact, all of the homes in our neighborhood are gold medallion homes. And I think this is really interesting. I become obsessed with all of these little things and I start to go down rabbit holes. Hopefully some of you all can relate to that, right? Getting obsessed with a particular topic. And so I just couldn't leave this one alone. And researching it further, I learned that a gold medallion home is actually part of a large corporate marketing campaign and that it was around, quote, clean energy, headed by an organization called the National Electrical Manufacturers Association. You can see future President Ronald Reagan actually in this advertisement. He was their main spokesperson, and General Electric in particular was one of the main sponsors. And we have to ask ourselves, why a corporate clean energy campaign? And so we can think about the 1950s in particular leading up to this. It's the post-war era. And the race to innovate around energy was an issue globally and at home. It was one of national security. So we think about electrical power plants were all coming online at an increasing pace. And that was great, except for it was driving the price of electricity down. So the corporations were interested in ensuring that that demand that at the time was staying flat would also increase. Hence, they had this campaign geared towards fully electrifying your home. And that's really parallel to some of the clean energy topics we hear today, right? And there's a reason I'm setting it up this way. But the campaign, though, wasn't entirely rooted in greed. The value proposition that they had, and it was true, was that moving away from burning coal in the home would be healthier. So there was an environmental component to this, and it was true. It reduced healthcare costs. It transferred emission sources from homes to the place of origin. Yet on the flip side, that was a huge environmental cost. So these power plants that were coming online were largely hydroelectric. This was a time of fevered building of dams in the US, and proto-environmentalists at the time were actually scrambling to fight the establishment of these dams that were proposed in some of our most iconic national parks. This is actually a movement that launched the Sierra Club to national fame. So the Sierra Club that we know today was really launched into national fame by these environmentalists fighting against these dams in our national parks. So it's weird because we have two different environmental things going on. This environmental value from the corporate marketing campaign, it wasn't wrong. Our homes are healthier because of this, but also there was the environmental footprint. And we see a lot of parallels with politics that's going on today and the position that this puts environmentalists in when it comes to transitioning to clean energy or quote clean energy, right? There's always some kind of impact. So that tension that's repeated multiple times throughout history, every time, actually, our environmental policy has benefited from it. So despite the obvious setbacks we've endured and learning our lessons, if we look at a high level of the history of environmental policy, this back and forth tension plays out a few times over. So first, in the Roosevelt era, they really recognized that the threat of increasing industrialization was there, and there was this movement to preserve these huge areas of land. The era of the gold medallion home, the campaign and the house that I live in, there was this massive popularity and influence due to Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which I hope all of you have read. And that was really leading us into the second era of environmental policy. This was codified, ironically, by the Nixon administration. There was this national public outcry and concern around pollution and its impact on public health. And this resulted in policies and foundational laws like the Endangered Species Act, the National Environmental Protection Act, the Clean Water Act. It established the EPA. And this is all despite fierce pushback from what is now the regulated community. and claims that this would actually stifle our transition to a cleaner energy of hydroelectricity. All of these ebbs and flows throughout history are actually what give me hope today. Significant public concern about our climate, especially by ever younger generations that I see, combined with these increasingly visceral impacts of climate hazards to our economy and our well-being, is driving the seeds of a new environmental revolution, in my opinion. I'm calling it the sustainability revolution. And the bipartisan infrastructure law, I think, shows us this. It starts to give us insight into what the future can be and what our opportunities are on the horizon. So it stops short of introducing new programs and policies, but what it does is tax on language to existing programs that impact every sector. And that language is centered around 3 words. Those 3 words are resilience, sustainability, and equity. And it recognizes that this is going to require innovation and investment. So it infuses all this much needed cash into many of these existing federal programs. At the same time, it urges that innovation and transition to clean energy, a very familiar tension historically. I think this is really fascinating. So just as the proto-environmentalists of the 50s and 60s influenced those revolutionary new policies of the 70s, we see public outcry about climate change and social injustice today beginning to influence policy now. But corporations are a part of this too. We really see these 3 major systems. I'll go ahead and get them all on here. And they're all interrelated. So personal and social whims have emerged strong in areas of climate and social justice, driving it perhaps greenwashing by corporations and their marketing initiatives to appear to be sustainable. But now we're seeing a movement by corporations to actually make these real and do good by their word in that, because a global pandemic exacerbated by climate change really greatly interrupted their supply chains and their bottom lines. So we see a lot more discussion around topics of ESG in the corporate world. This is environmental social governance, is what that stands for. And there's expected guidance from the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, on climate disclosures for corporations. And so all of these things are very real, and they're driving real change in corporate practice. And that SEC policy that I mentioned is just one of many new lines of evidence we see from the policy side around all of this. I mentioned the bipartisan infrastructure law. We have the Inflation Reduction Act that puts a lot of funding into environmental topics. And there's global initiatives around this as well that are making more progress. So we have a lot of opportunity from the policy side as well as the corporate side. So what gives me a lot of hope when I look at this in the broad context, these 3 eras of environmental policy, before we dive into some of the corporate stuff more deeply, we can see that they become increasingly holistic over time. Each is kind of learning from mistakes and consequences of the former. I'm not saying it's fast, I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's definitely happening. So if we look at the Roosevelt era, it conserved nearly 230 million acres, it established a Forest Service, but it was still entrenched in a philosophy that we were separate from the environment. These protected lands were like places that we would go to and visit and come back from, or in the cases of national forests, they were places that we would exploit. And then we would go back and we would just continue conducting our business and our societies without thinking of the consequences more holistically. It also had an animal wildlife focus. And as a lot of us on the call know today, that's something that still has a significant influence on conservation policies and funding today. So moving into the Nixon era, well, it gave us the first Earth Day. It established those key environmental policies I talked about. So the Endangered Species Act, Clean Water, NEPA, and EPA. Its philosophy was slightly more aware of our relationship to the environment, at least in that it impacts us, but still too, it had its flaws and vulnerabilities. So the Endangered Species Act, while hugely important, is species specific and based on reactive policy, so reacting to species that we know are on the decline. And the recent headlines of 21 species delisted by extinction isn't exactly great news that we want to celebrate. And a similar law, SARA in Canada, it takes a proactive approach. So it's very similar to the ESA, but there's a philosophical difference in that it takes a proactive approach to listing species before they start to decline. But they're still facing those same issues. So we know that there's something fundamentally flawed about the species-specific approach. And additionally, environmental policies around the regulated community, while progressive in many ways, in the Nixon era, they actually exacerbated environmental injustices that are trying to be corrected today in new policies. So moving into what I'm calling the sustainability era, when reading the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, it stopped short of establishing those new programs, like I mentioned, but it does include that more holistic language. It is recognizing that we're a part of and impact our environment, and that equity is key for moving forward on any future progress. So language around Indigenous knowledge and social equity can be found throughout, in addition to resilience and sustainability. So to me, this is a major harbinger of hope, and I hope it is for you all as well. So piggybacking off of that optimism around the future of our environmental policies, let's also take a look at some interesting developments happening in the free market. So in the corporate world, we're seeing a lot of news, both good and bad. Everything from entities being called out for greenwashing, all the way to other companies seeking real change and investment in the name of their corporate interests in sustainability and resilience. This has been a trend for quite a while, but that global pandemic that we all had to suffer through interrupted their supply chains and bottom lines, and it was a really interesting catalyst for highlighting the real consequences of ignoring the health of our natural world. So we see the establishment of new markets. So wetland and stream mitigation is probably the most well-known and established, with carbon accounting next, and I'm starting to hear really interesting discussions around things like biodiversity accounting. All of these are obviously not without their flaws. They're largely immature markets. They largely lack accountability and standards at this point, but they're evolving. And I see technology already really improving this as well. So things like remote sensing and Earth observation to monitor these investments and measure their success or their lack of success, to hold companies to their word. In turn, these same technologies are helping to drive discussions around those standards and policies that are currently lacking. So I also see significant expansion of sustainability officers in corporations. So while their missions may vary greatly, fundamentally, they're tasked with developing initiatives that meet sustainability and resilience metrics. And these initiatives often result in corporate funding. So that's really awesome, I think. Increasingly, I'm hearing questions from these entities around biodiversity and ecosystems, and I honestly get the impression that they don't yet know who to ask their questions to, who to partner with. They're not really tied into our community yet. So they're good questions, but maybe they're asking them to the wrong audience, which is exciting for us, but we need to be prepared to respond. I think of it like that question that my parents used to ask me when they were taking my moral temperature of, what would you do with $1 million? As a community, if funding sources become increasingly diverse, as I suspect they are we prepared to be able to give them data-driven tools that facilitate understanding around where to prioritize these investments and why? So I personally believe that GIS is a path forward here, a path forward for greater collaboration and for taking advantage of these emerging opportunities. Many of us that work in conservation, we talk about something called the funding implementation gap. And even with these incredible investments being made by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, we know that it's still going to fall short of meeting our most pressing challenges. We also talk about the funding implementation gap when some of our foundational environmental policies are scrutinized. Some may argue that our environmental policies are failing us, while there's also the argument that they could be effective if only they received the funding they deserve. Another example of that funding implementation gap. Historically, many of us have used GIS for these first few key areas. So if we look in the top right, we're looking at mapping and visualization and analytics. So collecting data in the field, visualizing it on a map, maybe some modeling. We heard and saw a lot of that today. But we have a wealth of opportunity to use GIS to help close that funding implementation gap. So using it to help others understand complex interactions between our environment and our economies, for example, to drive decision-making in situations that have multi-perspective tensions. So like our clean energy transition, that's great environmentally in some ways, but not so great in other ways. There's a real tension there, and drive multi-perspective benefits. and then measuring our success when we take these actions. This is the full spectrum of something called the geographic approach. So as a community, I really encourage us to consider how best to position ourselves to take advantage of these future opportunities, whether they come from the private sector or the public sector. The sharing that we're doing today between the LTERs and our land stewards is something we can actually scale and implement, and that really excites me. We can collaborate in a way that's constant in real time, moving beyond our classic uses of GIS, just maybe for the field, and actually leverage it to facilitate greater understanding, to share the right pieces of information with the right folks at the right time, and to bring us to a shared understanding so that we can maximize investments when we do take action. So GIS tools enable that geographic approach, that a framework for applying our expert knowledge widely and at scale. And it's not unprecedented, so we can actually look to our own community for inspiration. Just as the Natural Areas Association brought together the LTERs and the land managers in this great virtual conference today, I decided to also look at a slice of the same community, kind of sleuthing in ArcGIS online. We also got some feedback from the LTERs, so thank you very much, and other things that I'm just aware of throughout my work generally. So it's like these great story maps and field work by the LTERs with Esri's tools, but also from our state agencies. So I have an example here from the PA Game Commission in particular. They're using this really holistic GIS approach to track their treatments through time on their public land. So this is something that can be interacted with. It's tracking that over time. So when they're doing prescribed burns, for example, that polygon and its additional attribute information, things like the time of day, wind speed, the severity of the burn, all of those things can be tracked and layered on top of one another. And that information, someone else would be able to take that and maybe apply it to their research in the long term. So that's one great example. Another one I really love is by Colorado Natural Heritage Program. So what they were doing, they actually have a landowner outreach program that they participate in for ranchers in the area. So they were actually taking vegetation plots throughout a particular watershed, and they were modeling elk habitat in the summer and the winter, but then they were looking at how that habitat changed against a major transportation corridor that went through the area that was preventing elk from moving up and down their range, or threatening to prevent that. So using these maps and this data-driven, intuitive way of thinking and seeing information, they were able to take those and actually increase the participation from ranchers, because suddenly they were able to see that. So they had greater enrollment, they had greater cooperation, and they had greater success in that program just from doing this kind of modeling. I love that example. I also see this coming from our nonprofit partners as well. This example here in the top right is from Audubon, using survival by degrees data to model areas of likely extirpation of bird species, but also potential colonization by bird species. This drives that proactive conservation action. They're able to then communicate with their donors and their audience around where those conservation actions need to occur. And I'm sad I don't have a screenshot here, but hopefully some of you all have seen this. Recently, Audubon this year, they have a new website that allows people to interactively explore with these beautiful animated maps about bird migration. And that actually went viral on social media. It was such an awesome thing to see this go viral. And again, it was that capturing the audience's imagination by allowing them to explore with maps visually and understand what this is and their relationship to it. Because people, when they look at that, they live at a certain place, right? And so where they live then relates them to something else that they see on a map, another piece of information, and brings them into the topic. So NatureServe and the Heritage Network generally, they have this revolutionary work that they've conducted with the maps of biodiversity importance. I'm sure all of you have heard about this. I see this being increasingly looked at for informing a wide variety of investments and actions. And also I think of their Explorer Pro. So the new NatureServe Explorer Pro, it goes beyond just showing us where species are, but it allows people to actually interact with that and assess this information against scenarios like infrastructure development. And it's greatly increasing our ability to collaborate in those kinds of discussions. As our Esri president and founder, Jack Dangerman, says, GIS not only tells us what is now, but it can tell us what is into the future. It's our crystal ball. And in this context, that means bridging the gap between that long-term ecological research and the choices we make today as land managers. But one of my favorite examples that I wanted to bring to the table to show how that can come together is in the bottom right here. This is a public facing, you can Google it and look it up, but it comes from the White House. We worked with them on their climate mapping and resilience adaptation portal. And what this does is it allows communities to understand at a local level how climate change is going to impact them now and into the future, and help them prioritize investments. It shows things not only like their climate variables, but it shows underserved communities and where those are. And it also puts an economic impact on these things that helps them understand and prioritize, and then actually go after funds that meet those priorities once it's revealed to them. That can be really difficult for communities to do. And I think as a community of land managers, we have an opportunity to look at some of these patterns and apply them ourselves. So as we're preparing for what I think is a future of increased both private and public investment and focus on conservation, we can look to federal investments from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act to help us modernize our practices. So I've gone through some programs, federal programs, and I've looked at their requirements, some of the language there, and I pulled it out. And if we look at this, so things like inventory and document, well, that's something that a lot of us are already familiar with. We're already using things like field maps or Survey 123 to do that, or even quick capture. Prioritizing treatment within a given geographic area, that's actual language from one of the federal programs. Well, prioritization means really layering different variables on top of each other, understanding how they interplay, and then deciding that, okay, this is revealed as that area of priority. And we can do those kinds of analyses in ArcGIS Pro. So those are things a lot of us on the call are already very familiar with. But then we move into some of this other language, promoting public engagement and learning opportunities. This is a requirement in many of the federal programs that we receive our funding from. Well, we can look to technology to help achieve that requirement. So things like dashboards that summarize information in a really clear and concise way for people, or experience builder, maybe giving them a more rich experience that's interactive with the maps and they can explore that, or story maps that help walk them through the context of a particular topic. That gets us really into that public education and outreach activities. So things like not just educating them on something, but getting them to participate, maybe as citizen scientists in some of our practices. And we can use things like Hub Premium for that. That's a community engagement tool on the Esri platform to help that two-way engagement, but also provide citizen scientists with specific tools so that the information that we're receiving back from them is controlled, it has good quality, and we know that we can trust it to actually use it in then our future scientific topics and research. So just some final thoughts that I kind of want to wrap up with, things to summarize what I've presented here today. We have exciting opportunities on the horizon. We know this for a fact from the infrastructure bill as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. We've definitely seen that funding. But then I'm also here to tell you, perhaps anecdotally, or maybe some of you have already seen opportunities here, that I think we're going to see it from the private sector as well. We're going to start seeing increased opportunities for funding. And we have a great opportunity to start including them in conversations. They're asking really interesting questions. They're coming to Esri and asking us these questions. And I'm thinking, why aren't you asking Natural Areas Association and their membership or these other kinds of things? And so we have a great opportunity to collaborate there and make sure that these investments are driving towards our priority topics. So that's the first thing. It's going to require us, though, to better communicate and collaborate. Because we have new audiences, they're asking those new questions, we have an opportunity to take investments from both the public and private sector and accelerate our impact here, to heighten our relevancy and drive those more holistic philosophies that I really think are coming to fruition and being codified in policy as we move forward. And I really see GIS as a common language there. So thinking about the collaboration that we've seen today, thinking about our future opportunities that are on the horizon, I really think that we can look to GIS and expand how we use it and modernize some of our practices and our sharing in that way. So with that, that's really my message for today. It's a message of hope, and it's a message of action, and it's a message that we have the tools already available to us. And I think I'm really excited to see how we apply them moving into the future for the betterment of the work that we're all doing. So thank you again to Natural Areas Association. And Lisa, I don't know if we have time for questions, but I will pause there.
We do, Sunny. Thank you so very much. Always, you always offer tremendous insights and angles on things. And you're an incredible educator. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I do encourage folks in chat to keep questions coming. We do have one, and the question is, what are the metrics to the best of your knowledge, maybe up to 3 to 5, that corporate sustainability officers are typically evaluated against?
Yeah, it's been really dependent on different companies. I'm probably not going to be able to answer the question directly, but something that I'll share with you all, and that's something to consider, is that a lot of corporations, they conduct their business globally. So that means that they actually have global real estate portfolios. And sometimes they have land that they don't even know they own. I've actually seen a lot of this. And so one of their first efforts is in actually mapping the land that they own. And they're looking to do something oftentimes called optimizing their real estate portfolio. And what that means is offloading land that maybe they don't even need. And there's a real opportunity there. So some of the questions that they've started asking to Esri is how can they actually do that in a way that maybe they can partner with the local park or the local heritage network or the local whatever it is, so that they can then put that on their disclosure and say, rah, rah, we gave our land to help buffer this particular ecosystem or be restored. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on there. But again, they're coming to us to ask those questions. And then luckily, Esri does have a lot of those relationships. So we're able to say, oh, maybe you should talk to these folks. But we need to start having those conversations at scale. And so I'm seeing more movement on that. So yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Switching gears a little bit back to Esri and their products. I'd be interested in hearing about any entry-level GIS certification for folks in our profession.
Yeah, well, maybe that's something we can talk about within AA and start thinking about that. There's definitely, I will add, it won't necessarily be industry specific, right? So it's not something that we're offering just through an AA or anything like that, but we have a wide spectrum of free tutorials that you can take. So if you are using Esri today, you already have access to this. So if you go to, and maybe I can, I'll be on the fly here, maybe trying to find some links, but if you Google just like Esri tutorials or Esri learn lessons, there's actually a lot of freely available tutorials. So I will try and find that if we have another question that you can field to me.
Well, I'm not seeing any more questions here in chat. I'll give everybody another few seconds to offer. Yes. I do see. Do you see what Natalie has mentioned?
Yeah, she's definitely, the MOOCs are awesome. Actually, I should add, we have a climate change MOOC going on right now, so you can register for that. Let me find the link for that one. I'm actually personally registering for that one because I'm so fascinated by it. And it is all about how to use GIS to address climate change. And again, it's not necessarily going to be industry specific. So it's not going to be for land managers. It's going to be more general. But there's a lot of great tools and ways to use the tools that you're going to learn from that. So I will find that right now.
Does MOOCs stand for something? MOOC?
Yeah, it does. It's not a common term, is it? So it's massively open online course. So I think the last number I saw from our climate action MOOC was somewhere in the like maybe 20,000 have registered. Quite a few.
Fantastic.
Yeah, there's so many.
Like
and I'm going
to is working through the MOOC now.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So MOOC, massively open online course. But these are freely available and you can actually register for it and they will give you a login like specific to that. So you're not using, if you have like, there's these things called credits, you're just not having to use our own infrastructure to go through the tutorial. So they give you everything you need.
Fantastic. Fantastic. All right. Well, Sunny, thank you again so very much. And everybody that is still with us, I highly recommend you stay connected to Sunny and her crew at Esri. There's tremendous opportunity coming out of that program all the time. And you'll be hearing more from Sunny. If any of you tune into our webinars, you know that Sunny has been a part of those programs with a partnership series that we put together. So be on the lookout. Yes.
I'll put my LinkedIn in the chat. That's
Perfect.
definitely an easy way for folks to connect with me. And then you can always email me as well. So I'll put that in the chat. So yes, but thank you again, Lisa, Natural Areas Association. This has been an awesome conference and I was really honored to be able to cap it off. So
well, thank you so much, Sunny. And thanks to you all.